It is Friday on Daily Delivery. Glad to be back for another day and the final show of the week. Happy Karl Anthony Towns is eligible to be traded day to those who celebrate. Not saying that will happen anytime soon, but this is the day based on his contract stipulations that the Wolves big man is at least eligible to actually be traded. There's been plenty of rumors. There's been plenty of theoretical trades. There's been plenty of good reporting suggesting that nothing is going to happen, at least not this off season. But we will see. That is something that's at least a reality that can happen this day going forward. Lots to talk about on this show. Other than that, though, Bobby Nightengale Jr. from the Star Tribune covers the Twins. Will join me here in just a little while. Not quite a halfway point review, not quite an all-star review, but somewhere in between. Twins have 3 more games before the break, starting tonight against Baltimore, then the all-star break next week, then a pretty easy, forgiving schedule for the rest of July coming out of the break. Maybe a chance for them to create a little separation in the AL Central. They've started to play a little bit better, although Kansas City helped that for sure, but they've won 5 of their last 6. And sometimes the negative with this team overshadows the positive. We've got to take a look at all that has gone well with this team, including the pitching and the offense maybe starting to show some signs of life lately. So Bobby and I will talk about that, and we'll talk about the upcoming Major League Baseball draft, where the Twins have the number 5 overall pick starting Sunday. So we'll get to that here in a little while. Some Aurora news from Thursday. First, though, what did I miss? If this was a concert, like a rock concert, a big arena show, this would be the time when the musicians, whatever your favorite band was, took off the heavy equipment, took off the electric guitars and things like that, and grabbed an acoustic guitar or two for a few songs. I'm going to slow it down here just for a minute. Not talking about anything that's pressing or immediately happening, but a couple things that I've been thinking about. One prompted by a listener email that I'll get to here in a minute. The other, though, so my latest, I don't want to say obsession's the wrong word because I don't do this every day, but it's become part of my, as I'm winding down at night, maybe the kids are starting to fall asleep. I'm working to help them fall asleep, and I'm just kind of like sitting there on my phone, like, hey, what should I check on? What am I up to now as I'm kind of like winding myself down? Found this site thanks to some friends. Maybe thanks is maybe too strong a word, because it's another one of those kind of time sucks that is good, but I don't know if I need more of these. But a site called Immaculate Grid. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. And all it is, it's very basic, which appeals to me. It's just 9 squares of essentially baseball trivia, but not even trivia. Basically, you're just matching teams in these squares. You've got, usually most days, it's 6 squares where you're trying to remember and name a player who was on 2 different specific Major League Baseball teams. So the grid might have the Twins and the Yankees. That's, for example, maybe a bad example. That's bad memories for some of you. But someone who played for both the Twins and the Yankees, you have to think of that person, make a guess, and if you're right, the square gets filled in. If you're wrong, you don't get that square for the day. So the goal is obviously to get all 9 squares filled in, and usually one of the last row is usually some sort of specific milestone, like, hey, someone played for the St. Louis Cardinals and hit 40 home runs in a season, something like that. So it's just this specific, it scratches this specific itch, I think, for longtime baseball fans. And I grew up, primarily in the mid 80s was kind of the heyday of my baseball card collection. I was, 8, 9, 10 years old, growing up in North Dakota, going down to the mini mart, buying a whole bunch of 84 Fleer. That was really the first big year I collected. Those were the cards that I remember getting the most. They were like 35 cents a pack, something like that. I'd get a lot of those, and I would, organize my baseball cards by team. I would, write down all the statistics from all the players and, make, kind of pit them against each other, things like that. Kind of like, really early days, pre-internet stuff like that, but like really early days of number crunching, things like that. I was really into that with baseball, but when they did that, I accumulated this this wealth of seemingly and still probably fairly useless knowledge of all of these players from that era and beyond. I still enjoy baseball, and into the 90s I really remember a lot of the players from that era too. But it's 80s and 90s, I have this kind of vast reservoir of player memories, player statistic memories that I can now dig up and use on this immaculate grid. I'm remembering my cards. Who played for the Tigers and the Blue Jays? Who played for these two teams? Things like that. And it's surprising how you pull something out of your mind that you never remembered or that you thought maybe was lost forever. So it's the other day, it was asking for an Orioles player who had 200 hits in a season, and I'm like, Orioles player. God, for some reason I remembered Al Bumbry from the 80s, from those Orioles team. I'm like, God, I'm pretty sure I remember him having a 200 hit season. And I could not come up with, for some reason, anybody else, so I guessed him. And yet, in fact, he was one of the players. You get a percentage of how many people guessed that player correctly that day, and he was a 0.3. So that's your rarity score, 0.3%. And that's kind of fun too. You see if you have come up with someone who is kind of rare, and that's part of the fun of this. So anyway, if you haven't tried it, if you really need something else in your life to occupy you in a certain way, it's harmless fun. It's usually a 10-minute, 15-minute process every day. If you don't take it too seriously, if you're not afraid to make wrong guesses, things like that, it's fun. I've found it to be quite fun. Friends of mine on our group text, on our baseball road trip text group, have turned me on to it, and I like it. It's fun. It's something else, something that scratches a particular itch for, I think, baseball in particular. I don't think we sit around and do this quite as much with old basketball players. Maybe some of you do. Old basketball players or old hockey players or even old NFL players. There is this genre of just naming guys. I think there's something to that with old sports athletes, things like that. But I think that baseball in particular lends itself to that. So check out Immaculate Grid if you get a chance. I'm really enjoying it, and I think I will going forward. Other thing.
Time to check my social media, yeah. To see who loves me online. Hashtag blessed life.
Yes, this is social media related, even though it was from an email from Jimmy at DJ Glove Repair on Twitter. He said he noticed that I called Twitter hot garbage the other day on the podcast, wanted to know what I think of Twitter these days, where I think it's headed, how I view it now as a member of the media. It's complicated, I think. It's an interesting question because I don't think I interact with Twitter in the same way that I used to, and I think in some ways that's healthy. I think I used to use Twitter too much, so maybe some of the changes on Twitter that have been ushered in since Elon Musk paid $44 billion to buy it several months ago. I mean, some of that has created some natural attrition on the site, myself included. A couple months ago, I uninstalled the Twitter app from my phone. I just don't use it as much. I don't find it as entertaining. I still find it useful to a degree, but I find it to be more transactional and less conversational than it used to be. I go there still to find breaking news. I go there to post things that I have written or talked about on this podcast, but I don't find myself engaging in it the same way as I used to. And some of that is some of the new user rules, some of how that has transpired. Some of it's just people have left it and have made it a less interesting place to be. And, maybe some of that eventually has streamlined it into a better business model. I think that remains to be seen. But as a user, I just find it to be a less interesting place, still a less useful place than it used to be. I remember, maybe at the heyday of Twitter, probably 8 to 10 years ago, maybe I would say, when it was still some early adopters, but it was a lot of people had already joined and we kind of figured out the platform, things like that. It was a place to, it was the place to be when you were watching a game. It was like your second screen. You were watching Twitter. You were watching TV. You were watching a game. You were commenting on Twitter. you're having these dialogues, you're seeing people react in real time. I think that still kind of happens, but it's not the same experience. It's not the same. So I think that piece of it, I think there's a certain sadness that kind of sense of community to it has eroded over time. And maybe some of that's just natural as the platform has been around longer, but I think some of it has to do with how it is being run these days and from the fact that fewer people that I know at least are using it and engaging with it that way. And if you lose that critical mass, you definitely lose that kind of sense of community. So that's kind of the short to long answer. I don't know if where that clocks in your mind, but that's kind of, Jimmy, that's how I kind of view Twitter these days. I still think it's a useful platform. I don't know that I will join something else comparable to it. I think it's kind of a hard to replace kind of experience, but I don't think it's, irreplaceable. It's just, I can't imagine myself jumping into something else full force. I feel like Twitter is still kind of the thing for me until something else maybe emerges, but for now, I'm still on it. I'm still using it more than any other platform. I don't use Facebook that much, hardly at all. I uninstalled that from my phone years ago. I use Instagram, but that's less for a professional reason, more for personal, posting family photos, things like that, things that I find interesting. Twitter is still the place that I go primarily to post, and until further notice, that is where I am. The Star Tribune does not make me be on Twitter. They've been very good about telling reporters, leave Twitter whenever you want if you don't feel like there's value to it, if you don't like it, things like that. I still find value in it, so I'm still doing it. I'm curious how everybody else feels. If you want to chime in, find me on Twitter at Randball. That's where you find me on Instagram as well, or send me an email. Let me know what you think, how you are interacting with Twitter, and how that has changed over time.
MGM Wine and Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, pre-mixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to MGMWineandSpirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine and Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
Let's talk Twins with new Star Tribune beat writer Bobby Nightengale Jr. Bobby was on 2-3 weeks ago when he had just started, but now, Bobby, you've covered a lot of games. You were there in Atlanta when they had their kind of closed-door, players-only meeting. Rocco Baldelli kind of going off on the offense and the approach at the plate. Didn't get a whole lot better, at least consistently against Baltimore, but now these last 3 games against Kansas City, a sweep and a lot of runs in those games. Is everything solved now that they swept the Royals and have won 5 out of 6, or where do you think this team is at right now?
If they could play the Royals all the time, a lot of things would be fixed. But yeah, I think the quality of at-bats has improved a lot since the closed-door meeting they had. Rocco called him out. As hard as I haven't been around the team forever, but people who've been around Rocco since he became Twins manager talked about he really hasn't been that forceful publicly in the way he's talked about players the way he was that day. So yes. He criticized the offensive approach, saying, hey, we're not making adjustments. They got shut out by Colby Allard, it was like his first start in 2 years, and he had 8 strikeouts and completely overpowered the Twins. So I think that was kind of like that's something has to change the second half of the season. They're striking out less, even though they had last 2 games in Baltimore, they only scored 2 runs in those 2 games. I still felt like they're putting the ball in play more. They're doing a little bit more where they're more competitive at bats. The starters in Baltimore, they had to at least fight to pitch 6 innings, which hasn't always been the case. I think some pitchers have cruised against them in the past. So I think even though you play the Royals, you sweep the Royals are a bad team, no doubt. I do think there are signs that it's like, okay, a switch is flipped at least a little bit in terms of the quality is better. Guys have more energy. And some bats are just heating up. It's a good thing when Max Kepler's starting to hit. Byron Buxton's hitting the ball really hard, even if he's lined out a few times. Carlos Correa's getting on base more. So it helps when your big hitters are doing well. But I do think there has been a little bit of a switch.
What was the specific approach change? Are they like getting swings earlier in the counts? Because I know that was one thing that maybe we had noticed, or that they had noticed about kind of how things were going, or what specifically have they changed to cut down on strikeouts, to put the ball in play more, to not be maybe in these negative counts that they've talked about?
Well, one, I mean, now that's a players-led hitters meeting. Used to be the coaches gave them this information. The players sit there and, okay, here's, how the pitcher's probably going to try to attack you guys.
Sure.
Here's what you need to focus on. Now it's more player-led and saying, and players say it kind of makes a difference just because, like, when you hear it from Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton, Royce Lewis, before he got hurt, kind of made the point saying, if those guys say, hey, he throws a cut fastball, but it doesn't really cut as much as you think it will, and it doesn't cut as much as it looks like it would on video, he's like, that means more to me than what I'm going to read in a scouting report. So I think that's made a difference in terms of like something that's tangible. But also like cutting down on the strikeouts, like Carlos Correa has even said, hey, I can't be in 2 strike counts all the time. I just need to focus on the ball, putting on the ball in play, be more of a hitter instead of a slugger. Royce Lewis kind of hinted at it before the players only meeting, saying, the hitting coaches kind of said, get a pitch to drive. But he's like, if they have 2, you watch strike 1 on the outside corner, and then you will watch a breaking ball, then it's like, okay, I didn't get a pitch to drive and I'm already in an 0-2 count. And, I kind of wasted the at-bat. So I think it kind of was bubbling up and then it kind of exploded during the players only meeting. I'm sure players yelled at each other and got the frustrations out. Because a lot of players have talked about being more unified in terms of like supporting each other and more of a unified approach. But I think it's just more accountability is a word that a lot of players have used to, just saying now that we're leading the hitters meetings, you can't blame the hitting coaches. You can't blame the scouting reports. You're leading the hitters meetings. You're leading the game plan. So it's up to you to kind of figure it out. And so far, I mean, 6 games in, they've seen results from it.
Yeah, and so they've got 3 more now against Baltimore. Baltimore's been a surprisingly good team this year. The Twins did take 2 out of 3 in Baltimore. They had the big 8-run outburst, and then they won a 1-0 game in there. I believe that was the really good Bailey Oberstart. And they've gotten some really good, I mean, in the midst of all this, all the talk of the hitting, the pitching has continued to be excellent. I mean, you had the Joe Ryan complete game shutout about a week ago. Pablo Lopez did that to the Royals on Wednesday. You had that Bailey Oberstart. Kenta Maeda has been really good since he came back from the injured list. I mean, that piece of the story has been pretty constant all year and has been probably some of the source of frustration with the offense. It's like if the offense could just be average, this would be a really good team based on how good the starting pitching has been.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of been the case for the Twins over the years. It's always been if they just had enough pitching, they're always going to hit enough. If they just had enough pitching, they'd be a great team. And now they have it. The hitting kind of sunk them in the first half. But the way they've been pitching lately, I mean, Ryan Jeffers even said it after Pablo Lopez's complete game shutout, where he said the way they're pitching, it's hard to lose, many games. And, I saw the starting rotation since the players only meeting has the ERA 0.088.
Wow.
Or 0.88. So, I mean, they've been dominant.
Yeah.
And that's huge. I mean, I think that's kind of what gives the Twins confidence going into the second half. Yeah, they're only 2 games above 500. Helps when you're in a bad division. But if you have starting pitching like that, I mean, going into the postseason, if you can win the division, you feel confident. I mean, going into any playoff series, if you have the starters that they have. So I think there's a lot of confidence from that group and starting rotation. I mean, Pablo Lopez even mentioned after his shutout that, hey, I saw Joe Ryan do it and saw how much the crowd was into it and thought, how cool would that be? So, I mean, they're feeding off each other. It's a good kind of healthy spirited, not competition, but like I want to be as good as the last guy. And, they're carrying the torch forward.
And Luis Arias all the way down to 384. Maybe that trade, maybe Twins fans will start to come around on that trade a little bit, although I think it's maybe going to be a while till that one feels like it's closer to even. Although I think the thing we forget about that trade is the Twins got a couple of prospects in that deal too. And Lopez, I think Arias, how good Arias has been, has overshadowed the fact that Lopez has been good and has been, maybe not the top of the rotation guy that they maybe envisioned because he's had a few rough starts, but showed what he could bring to this team with what he did against Kansas City and can maybe be one of those rotation anchors for quite a while based on his age and his contract and what he can do.
Yeah, I feel like the deal gets better when he signed the contract extension. I mean, I think every start you see flashes of like, okay, this could be a completely dominant pitcher. Obviously, it came together against the Royals, but I feel like it's been one bad innings kind of been the story of his first half where it's like 5 good innings, 1 bad one. six innings, 4 runs allowed. That's kind of been the first half of his season. But in those 5 innings where he's really good, it's like swing and miss stuff. I think he's second in the league in American League in strikeouts. So I mean, how many Twins pitchers have they had? Maybe since like Johan Santana, where you have a guy leading the league in strikeouts. So I think there's a lot to like there. And there's a lot of like underlying numbers behind just below his ERA, more advanced numbers that say, he's pitching a lot better than his ERA shows. And it's a good sign for the second half if he can stay healthy.
Speaking of healthy, missing a few guys right now, including in the bullpen, Brock Stewart, that was a blow because he had been so good. And Royce Lewis, one of the guys that even when the team was slumping, he was up over 300, had supplied a lot of big hits for them late in games to kind of get wins to the finish line. He's out for, maybe 6 weeks with that oblique, but they've been able to kind of withstand that, other people kind of picking up the slack. But how big is that injury, the Royce Lewis injury in your estimation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, he's, for a guy who's only played like 50 career games, his offensive approach and the way he plays, he looks a lot older than that. Provided a spark when everyone else was struggling. So, I mean, that hurts. Jose Miranda kind of gets a second chance to make up for his early season struggles. But that's a tough loss in terms of the lineup. Just a guy who has enough power to probably hit 20 homers in a full season, but also good enough to hit around 280 too if he just wants to put the ball in play. I think you still see the adjustments, like a guy who's missed a lot of time, still adjusting to major league pitching. So I think that bodes well for his future when he's healthy. But yeah, I mean, for an offense that's struggling, you can't lose guys that are being productive hitters. And now you're asking Jose Miranda to step up along with, Carlos Correa, Byron Buxton. Those guys have to hit to their usual standards if Royce isn't in the lineup.
Correa has been hitting leadoff a lot lately. I don't get the idea that he loves that necessarily, but it seems to suit him okay. What do we know about kind of that adjustment, both to the batting order and how he has approached that spot?
Yeah, I think it's one of those kind of matches his approach. Like he's not hitting for as much power. I mean, he's having a bad offensive season for his standards. So I think it kind of goes into his approach saying, okay, I need to cut down on my strikeouts. I just need to get on base, trust the guys behind me. And so far, it's, he had a 4-hit game the other night. So maybe it plays into what he's trying to do right now. If he gets into a rhythm, I wouldn't be shocked if he moved lower down the order and then, can hit for power again and drive in some guys. But right now, I mean, I think the Twins just need those on-base guys. And you talked about, you lose Royce. Julian's been fine in terms of the leadoff guy. He's kind of suited there. But you don't have a ton of like get on base guys. And then you do have a lot of power guys behind them, but you don't have a lot of pure on base guys. And if Craig can kind of fill that void right now, I think that's the best thing for the offense.
Yeah. And, I think that maybe the other piece of frustration, I think, is that they, in this division, which they're only 2 games over 500, they're 2 games up on Cleveland right now. And, nobody has really, put such a big scare into them to overtake them. But at the same time, the Twins haven't been able to create that kind of separation that they could have and really taken advantage of the weak division just because they've struggled in their own right. What are the prospects for them creating some separation in the second half, or like, do you, after watching this team for a few weeks, do you think they have another gear where they can kind of run away with this division at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big question going into the second half. They have a really weak schedule after the All-Star break. I mean, they go to Oakland. Seattle's been underperforming. Then you have White Sox, Seattle, Kansas City right after that, leading into the trade deadline. So I think you're going to learn a lot about the Twins over those 2 weeks in terms of, can they beat up on bad teams? Outside of the Royals, they haven't had a ton of success against their divisional opponents, so they need to beat up on the White Sox. Seattle will be a good test for them because, like the Twins, they're another underachieving team. And it'll be interesting to see how the front office reacts to it. I mean, are they going to be true buyers at the trade deadline? You can look and say, okay, we're in first place, but how far are we from the Atlantas and the Tampa Bays that they got swept by in terms of, being a World Series contender? So I think you're going to learn a lot those 2 weeks. I think as long as they're pitching, you're always going to be in it. You're always going to have a chance. The offense is finally showing signs of life. We'll see how long that keeps up. but I think the talent's there to run away with the division. It's just in terms of can the offense produce consistently enough.
Is that where you think they would look to maybe make an addition by the deadline? I mean, we see old friend Nelson Cruz just got DFA'd. I don't know if somebody else picked him up yet, but like is a low leverage move or something like that to give them another bat. Is it the bullpen? It's definitely not the starting pitching. I don't think they're going to bolster that, but where do you think they would be looking, assuming they are going to add, not subtract?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look back into the bullpen. Like you mentioned, Brock Stewart being injured, Thielbar still out. So, I mean, there are some holes in the back end of your bullpen. Jorge Lopez back from the mental health injured list, but he hasn't been the setup guy that they want in front of Duran. So I do think there's kind of an opening there to try to, but I mean, every team could use solid relievers. I mean, that's the reason Aroldis Chapman got traded so early to Texas. So that's something, and probably a bat too. I mean, I know Royce Lewis the hope is he'll be back in 6 weeks. But obliques are tricky. I mean, they look at Caleb Thielbar, how long he's been out with his. So if he's out long-term, does that mean you need a third baseman or you're just another infielder to help out with protect yourself in case Royce doesn't get back on schedule, or just add another on-base type hitter, which are probably easier to acquire than power hitters at the trade deadline. So I'd probably say those are the two: relief pitcher and maybe one bat.
Couple more things for you, Bobby. This is probably more relevant to the 2028 Twins, but the draft is Sunday. The Twins have the number 5 overall pick. Kind of the new system baseball is using. They moved up kind of from where their draft slot would have been up to number 5. That means they're going to get a good player. How do you think they'll approach, kind of looking at how Derek Falvey and Thad Levine have approached past drafts? I don't know. What do you think? What do you think they look for at number 5 here?
Going into the draft, I mean, the kind of the draft pundits put it as it's a 5-player tier at top of the draft. 2 LSU players, Dylan Cruz, their outfielder, and pitcher Paul Skeens, Florida outfielder Wyatt Langford, and then 2 high school outfielders, Walker Jenkins and Max Clark. Those are the top 5 guys, elite prospects, probably top 50 prospects after their pick. So, I mean, the Twins, when they kind of won the lottery going from 13 to 5 in the offseason. So they're going to add a top 50 prospect if they draft one of those guys. There's a chance they add, they go outside the scope of the top 5. There's always financial reasons where you can save money in your first pick and use it to improve your later picks, draft a better high school player later. But yeah, they're in a really good spot in terms of advancing in the lottery from last year. If they draft one of the college guys, I don't think it'll be long. I mean, those 3, 2 outfielders and a pitcher, it sounds like all of them be kind of slotted in a AA pretty quickly. And it wouldn't be a shock if any of those 3 were in the big leagues next year. And then the 2 high school guys aren't far behind. So, I mean, I think there's a lot to like in this draft class. Some pundits say, it's the best top of the draft class in probably the last 5 to 10 years. So, the Twins really lucked out to have a chance there. And they also have, I think, 3 picks in the top 50. So, I mean, it'll be a nice boon for the farm system in terms of they made some trades that didn't go well last year. You trade a good prospect in the Jorge Lopez trade. You lost Spencer Steer and Christian Encarnacion Strand in the Tyler Mahle deal. So a quick chance to restock the farm system.
Well, it should be interesting to see what they do. And again, we don't see these guys for a long time. It's really the kind of the guys that are, the guys that are there right now, and some of the guys they picked, again, 4, 5, 6 years ago that are really coming up right now. I guess to that end, it doesn't seem like there's been, maybe there's a little bit, but is there any kind of immediate help on the horizon, or have we kind of seen all the guys that we think they're going to maybe run through here as contributors this year? Because we got Miranda back up now. You've seen the contributions of some of the pitchers. Anybody else waiting to help in the bullpen, or is it Wallner, or who else might help this year?
Yeah, I was going to say Wallner is hitting well in AAA. Trevor Larnach still in AAA and playing well. Celestino, a center fielder, AAA. So, I mean, there's some position player help. Bullpen, I don't know if you have a ton of guys that, like Louis Varland's probably your starter depth if someone goes down. But like Balazovic, they called up. He'd been one of their top pitching prospects and has kind of turned himself into a guy they see as like a seventh inning type reliever, kind of right before the seventh man. So those are probably your immediate prospects. I think like Brooks Lee was their first round pick last year. He's in Double-A, probably a year away at this point, but so not immediate help. But I think at least position player wise, if you wanted to, injuries happen, Wallner, Larnach are probably your top two outfielder choices.
Sounds good. Well, we'll be following the coverage this weekend against Baltimore, then a break, and then, like you said, some opportunities out of the break to maybe create a little bit of separation, maybe put it on the front office to go and get a little bit more help, kind of like they did last year. They made some moves at the deadline last year, didn't necessarily work out, but they kind of were in a similar spot last year where it was a weak division and they thought they could compete. We'll see if they do the same this year. Bobby, appreciate it. As always, follow Bobby Nightengale Jr.'s coverage, Star Tribune, StarTribune.com, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good stuff from Bobby. I've been enjoying talking to him. He's really immersed himself in this beat already, even after just starting a month or so ago. You can find a draft preview that he wrote about the Twins, StarTribune.com. That's at the top of the site as I record right now. I imagine that'll be pretty easy to find on Friday. So if you are curious about more draft info, check that out there. And just a point too, as we talked more, the Twins pitching staff has been so good this year, and I think some of the hitting woes have naturally risen to the top of mind for conversation because it's been surprisingly bad in some cases, and it's cost them, like they haven't been able to take advantage of this great pitching as much as they probably should have. But let's not lose sight of how good this pitching staff has been. Best ERA in baseball, number one in a lot of other categories. This has been an elite pitching staff this season. And even if they regress a little bit, but we're past the halfway point. I mean, I think we know they're a very good pitching staff, especially the starting rotation. Even if they regress a little bit, I think there's room for them to be a good second half team. So let's not lose sight of how good that pitching staff has been. And maybe if the offense can hit a little bit more, we will appreciate it even more. Let us finish with the cooler, Minnesota Aurora. A little bit more of a struggle than they might have liked, but the women's soccer team advances in the W League, USL W League playoffs. 1-0 win over Chicago City SC. That was in Flint, Michigan on Thursday. Some pretty dominant wins over Chicago during the regular season, but they did just enough in this game. They will now advance to the next round of the playoffs, the Eastern Conference Finals, again in Flint. That one on Saturday against the Indy 11 at 2 p.m. So good for Aurora, trying to win a championship last year. Made it all the way to the title game before falling short. That was the only loss in franchise history, so they're trying to cap it this year with a championship. We'll see if they're able to do that. They play, like I said, on Saturday. That will do it for me today. Bunch of good stuff coming up on next week's shows as well. Until then, enjoy the weekend. Back at it again with Royce on Monday.